functions. Just saying there are some options to consider. And finally, that last slide, there are lots of places around the world that have legislated these funny things called community empowerment. And some of them have been quite effective because they are then able to challenge decisions such as those being proposed by the government at the moment. And so there are opportunities looking around the world at how to challenge the DAPs, and if the DAPs do continue, how to ameliorate some of their effects. But I agree that at the moment the plan A should be scrap the DAPs. Plan B should be how do we start to rebuild and invest more significantly in Tasmanian capability around these important land use planning matters. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. Our next speaker is Anna Povey, President of Hands Off Our Gorge, who advocate for the future of Launceston's Cataract Gorge. Anna will talk about what proposed changes to planning appeal rights could mean for the future of the Cataract Gorge. And this also could provide an example of what could happen in other areas of other reserved public land. Thank you, Anna.
Good evening. I became the president of Hands Off Our Gorge in 2019 when the Skyways gondola was proposed for Cataract Gorge. Hands Off Our Gorge is a group of ordinary people who have day jobs or have retired. We are not what the Planning Minister calls a well-funded activist group or an anti-everything organisation. The committee and our 180 supporters went outside our comfort zones to protect our beloved gorge from a completely inappropriate Skyways gondola. We did this for the place and community that we love, and we did this in our own time and with no money apart from what was raised by good people running concerts and so on. We do have members with a range of talents and a lot of determination. First up, I have to explain that the Skyways gondola did not get to development assessment stage, let alone to an appeal at TASCAT. We were lucky because, as the gorge is public land, council-owned land, the council has to give landholder consent before a developer can put in a development application. Our story is relevant today because it's about how we, as a community group, improved the wider understanding of the proposal and how we engaged with councillors productively. And I don't believe these things would be possible with a development assessment panel. Every developer thinks their development is the best thing since sliced bread. That applies whether it is your new deck, or a high-rise hotel, or a gondola. The pro-everything brigade always gets out in force and shouts progress and stop the NIMBYs every time the community has something to say about quality of life, aesthetics, community spaces, or basically anything that questions the development. These people often don't spend too much time thinking about the many implications of the development. In fact, it's not easy to see all the implications. The Skyways gondola proposal included a map of the proposed route, a lot of reports, and a few carefully curated pictures. But how do we paint the true picture of a gondola in the gorge to assess it before it's a reality and we're living with it? Actually, it takes attention and deliberate imagination to translate the hundreds of pages of paperwork into a 3D mental concept that can be assessed. What would it feel like for people in the gorge when gondolas would be encircling First Basin? Would families at the pool and teenagers at Hoggs Rock feel intruded on by the gondolas constantly going overhead? Pictures don't show the gondolas moving, which automatically attracts the eye. How much bushland would be cleared for the towers and cable routes? What about bushfire safety? Is it true that gondolas will improve access for people with disabilities? Or will it be too costly for people on a budget? It was Hands Off Our Gorge who realised that the gondolas would be going right over the old Alexandra Bridge. It was Hands Off Our Gorge who created a scale image that showed the gondolas going over the end of the swimming pool, over the old bridge and up the hills. I personally climbed up the steep hills, through scrub and over rocks, to see where the corner towers would be. When I got to the first site, I looked out and was shocked to see right down the gorge to King's Bridge. That meant that anyone on King's Bridge or travelling over it would see the tower and the gondolas right in the middle of the vista. I looked out from the second tower site and saw most of West Launceston. We invited councillors to come and see the sites, and some took up our invitation. I led them to the tower sites, a difficult walk, and they were able to see the impacts of the development and in a way that they could not have done from the paperwork provided. The public wrote many letters to councillors and letters to the editor. Hands Off Our Gorge spoke at council meetings. We presented a petition with 4,500 signatures, and we met with every councillor but one individually. Will members of a development assessment panel be able to walk up the hills, or will they remain inside, judging impacts based largely on paperwork provided by the developer? The public would only be able to put in written representations at a late stage in the process. Would the DAP even be in Launceston, or would the decisions be made in Hobart? Would any of the panel members have grown up in Launceston, jumping off Hogs Rock, and now going to work over King's Bridge and looking down the bush-lined gorge to the untouched hills? The Planning Minister has been very clear. His DAP legislation is about facilitating development against what he calls the anti-everything brigade. He said, "Our pro-jobs DAPs bill backs in the builders, not the blockers, who for too long have dragged them down and held us back." This kind of culture wars comment shows that the Minister does not intend his DAPs to be independent or unbiased. He intends them to facilitate developments. We were lucky because we got to deal with a council, not a panel put together with those sorts of biases. The council created a high-level procedure for assessing developer requests on council-owned property. And I'm relieved to say that the Skyways gondola failed at that first hurdle because it just wasn't a good or appropriate development in the gorge. In fact, it got all of 25% of the available score, so it failed miserably. Our experience with the gondola has shown that development proposals can be complicated, and the developer's papers will present only a rosy angle. The community can stimulate better understanding of a development through questions and comments at council meetings, letters, conversations, artworks, videos and site visits, as well as standard written representations. Only written representations at a late stage would be possible with DAPs. Councillors are embedded in the community, and many are prepared to go the extra mile on important community issues. The councillors were careful to keep their planning authority hats on and to keep an open mind on the proposed development, but they were able to inform themselves about what the real implications of the proposal were. There is now a proposed chairlift upgrade, which will be a brand new development to which we are not necessarily opposed. We and the council are waiting for the proponents to provide details. Far from being, in the Minister's words, people who relentlessly oppose sensible, appropriate developments for the sake of stalling progress, it is our earnest desire that the proposal will be sensible, and we will not have anything at all to do about it. Great. But if the proposal would impact the gorge badly, we will engage with the council and with the developers, if we can, to aim for a better outcome. If a poor design does get development approval, we would want the option to appeal to the tribunal. This is local democracy in action, which can do the best for a local place, for everyone in the community. The beauty and fairness and appropriate development while keeping the things that we love.
Our next speaker is Mayor of West Tamar Council, Christina Homdale. Mayor Homdale is also the former president of LGAT, the Local Government Association of Tasmania, and Mayor Homdale was in that important leadership role for 4 years. Christina has been a great advocate in raising concerns regarding development assessment panels. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Sophie. And I have to say, I'm really thrilled to see the people that have turned up today, including politicians from both state and local government and concerned citizens, as we in Council are. I'm going to start by asking a very, very simple question. Realistically and practically, do we need a sledgehammer to crack a walnut? And before you answer that, the other pertinent question for all of us today to consider is, what's the problem that government is trying to solve? I agreed to speak at today's forum for 3 reasons. Firstly, I believe that this new level for project assessment proposed by the government is undemocratic. Secondly, I want to prosecute the case from the local government perspective and defend the level of government that I work in. And thirdly, as other speakers have raised, the bill's only avenue of appeal is the Supreme Court. In other words, it's all or nothing. I do want to emphasise that my council and the other 28 councils are strong supporters of development, and we don't believe this legislation is needed. The government's own position paper also says so. It's not an understatement to say that my council is extremely disappointed in the government's reasoning for the legislation, and especially disappointed that the government went to the Property Council to assist in drafting the DAPS bill and not to the local government sector. Late last year, the government released its position paper on DAPS, and we, like many other councils, responded. Disappointingly, the input from those councils was also ignored. To add insult to injury, the government chose to ignore our request to work with our sector to improve the process. This is not consultation. For whatever reason, the government has chosen to blame councils for a very small number of planning decisions that don't go the way of the developers. But what the government refuses to acknowledge is that these issues are the result of its planning system that it has failed to maintain adequately. And it's not just the local government sector that has raised concerns about this bill. The Tasmanian Planning Commission has said that the sector already administers development assessment processes efficiently, and that this new proposed process will add further layers to an already complex planning scheme, will require the duplication of administrative and technical functions, and result in a more expansive planning system. There is no doubt in my mind that this bill will firmly put politics into planning, and I could quote a number of cases as to why I believe that. Presently, if a council rejects a development application, it's because it doesn't comply with the Tasmanian planning scheme, or councillors have rejected the advice of their municipal planner. Either way, the development applicant can appeal, and in the first instance, mediation can take place between the applicant and the council to try to come to an acceptable solution so that the amended application then complies, or it goes to the planning tribunal for a hearing and a ruling. At the last recent Local Government Association general meeting on the 21st of November last year, all 29 councils voted unanimously not to support the introduction of the development assessment panels. There are already 2 additional options for developers over and above the present assessment process. There are the projects of regional significance as well as the projects of state significance pathways. So back to my initial question, with all of that, what is it the problem is that Parliament is trying to solve? To give you a picture of what is actually happening, I'm going to turn to some statistics, and I know statistics can be boring, but I think they will justify certainly my council's and the other councils' views. Tasmanian councils assess approximately 12,000 development applications each year, as Sophie has already said. Just 1% go to appeal, and of these, 60 to 80% are mediated. This can't happen with DAPS. It'll be the Supreme Court or nothing. Between 24 and 39 applications a year statewide go to a full hearing with the tribunal. These appeals are made up of third-party representations and the proponents' appeals. There are about 100 appeals of council decisions each year, which is 1.9% of applications, or 102 out of 2,000 applications in 22-23. In 22-23, there were only 21 full appeals that were not previously mediated. Of these, 10 were council approvals, 13 were appealed by the applicant and 8 by a third party. TASCAP did not agree with council decisions 6 times, which is 29%, and affirmed council's decisions 15 times, which is 71%. Compare this with the record of the Tasmanian Planning Commission, who will administer the DAPS. Over the past 6 years, the Commission refused an average of 10% of planning scheme amendments and 18% of combined and amendment applications. All of these were previously approved by the relevant council. Based on the Tasmanian Planning Commission record, councils are more likely to approve a development than the TPC. Typically, 70 to 80% of appeals are mediated again. This will not be an option if the DAPS legislation is passed. Next, Tasmania's Development Assessment System, is the fastest in the country. Discretionary applications are being determined in a median time frame of 38 days and permitted in 21 days. Tasmanian councils are on average 6 days faster than South Australia, 15 days faster than the Northern Territory, 21 days faster than the ACT, 43 days faster than New South Wales, 48 days faster than Queensland, 89 days faster than Victoria, and the data for WA at this time is lacking, but we think it's somewhere between 40 and 50 days. So decisions made by councillors are no more likely to be appealed than those made under delegation by planning professionals. Our state planning legislation, the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act of 1993, is now over 3 decades old and literally made for a different century. In my experience, the development application assessments that are prolonged have gone on to the Planning Tribunal or the Tasmanian Planning Commission. There is little evidence that the hold-ups are Council's assessment process, but that they are actually due, I believe, in the bottleneck at the Tasmanian Planning Commission. One of the East Coast councils recently had to wait nearly 2 years for a determination from the Planning Commission. And it reminds me a little bit about a man in the Soviet Union in the 70s that went along to purchase a new manufactured Lada car. He ordered and paid for the car and was told by the salesman that he would take ownership of his car on this day in 10 years' time. Frustratingly, the man then asked the salesman, "At what time will my car be delivered?" The lift salesman refrained from laughing and asked the man what difference it would make to him to know what time his car would be delivered on this day in 10 years. The man replied, because the plumber will be coming at 10 o'clock on that day. So we as a sector wait. The Tasmanian planning policies, which should express the state government's policies, approach and expectations of development and its regulations, are still not made after more than 7 years. The 3 land use strategies are almost 15 years old, and they are critical to guiding local development, but are increasingly creating uncertainty to proponents, as evidenced recently with the Stony Rise project in Devonport. What the state government demonstrates in its development of this bill is that it fails to understand how its own planning system presently works and has failed to maintain the system in a state that supports the decisions it wants. Is there an easy solution to the shortcomings? Probably not, but in my view, resourcing and adequately funding the government instrumentalities that we have to interface with as a sector would probably be a good start. When the government first announced its intention to introduce DAPS, the Labor opposition stated that it would not support the legislation. Regrettably, Labor has changed its mind and supported the passing of the legislation in the lower house. The DAPS came undone in the upper house because of the lobbying